Today, we will cover two horrifying caving stories. The first story is the most claustrophobic encounter an explorer can ever face, whereas in the second, one person's reckless interference with nature becomes everyone else's nightmare. As always, viewer discretion is advised. June 2nd, 2004. 9 teenagers stood at the entrance of Tongue River Cave in Wyoming, ready for an afternoon of adventure. 16-year-olds Barry Blaha and Dana Herbert had convinced their friends to explore the underground cave system. None had real caving experience, but they believed they could handle whatever lay ahead. They carried a mix of cheap flashlights, spare batteries, and a few borrowed headlamps, assuming it would be enough to light their way. There were no helmets, no proper caving gear, and no idea how dangerous things could get if anything went wrong. Entering in single file, they followed the winding passage into the mountain's depths, laughing and chatting as they went. At first, the main tunnel was wide, allowing them to stand upright and move comfortably, with plenty of space for everyone to spread out and explore different parts of the cavern. As they moved deeper into the cave, the teenagers found several side passages branching off from the main tunnel. Some led to dead ends, forcing them to backtrack and explore others. Along the way, the walls showed clear signs of water damage, loose rocks, and unstable sections, warnings any experienced caver would notice. But the teenagers were too caught up in the thrill to see the danger. Then Barry spotted something the others had missed, a narrow crack hidden in the shadows, seemingly leading deeper into the system. It wasn't on any map. To Barry, this felt like their discovery, something that could make them legends among their friends. Fueled by the rush of youth and the intoxicating thrill of discovery, Barry and Dana pushed deeper into the narrowing passage. While their friends wandered elsewhere in the cave system, the two of them were determined to claim this hidden tunnel as their own secret find. At first, it was manageable. They shuffled sideways through tight sections, their shoulders scraping against cold rock walls. Then came spots where they had to drop to their knees and crawl forward, their palms pressing into damp, gritty stone. Eventually, even that wasn't enough. The ceiling dropped so low they had to flatten themselves and army crawl on their bellies, inching forward in suffocating darkness. Their flashlight beams cut narrow cones through the void, revealing more tunnels stretching endlessly ahead. But the deeper they went, the tighter it became. The narrowest section loomed, a slot-like opening barely 45 centimeters or 18 inches wide, and just 60 centimeters or 24 inches high. A brutal squeeze that would intimidate even veteran spelunkers with proper training and equipment. Barry, smaller and more eager, went first. Dana followed close behind, forcing herself through the suffocating space. The rock pressed against their ribs and shoulders, every breath stolen by stone. To move forward at all, they had to exhale completely, letting the air leave their lungs before wriggling through the rock's unyielding grip. Barry reached a point where the passage became impossibly tight. The walls closed in so much that he couldn't squeeze through, no matter how he turned his body. The logical move was simple: back out and explore another route. But Barry's teenage impatience took over. Determined to push forward, he decided to clear the blockage by moving smaller rocks out of his way. He freed one arm in the cramped space and grabbed a rock about the size of a softball, thinking it was part of the obstruction. Without considering the consequences or how caves behave, he used the rock as a hammer, striking the larger stones ahead to break them apart or knock them loose. Growing more desperate with each attempt, every impact sent deep vibrations through the surrounding stone. Dust began raining down from the ceiling above. The cave had stood untouched for thousands of years, but it had never faced an assault like this. The fractured rock formation was balanced on a fragile equilibrium. Every strike from Barry's improvised hammer disturbed that balance, sending stress waves through the unstable ceiling above. Then came every spelunker's worst nightmare.
A deep, thunderous crack ripped through the passage, followed by the grinding roar of shifting stone. A massive boulder, later estimated at over 300 pounds, or 136 kilograms, broke free from the ceiling and crashed down, directly behind Dana. The impact was brutal. The entire passage shook violently as a choking cloud of dust and debris swallowed the air. When the echoes finally died and the dust began to clear, the horrifying reality set in. The fallen boulder had completely sealed the passage behind them. Barry and Dana were trapped in a space barely larger than a coffin.
The claustrophobic nightmare that unfolded was beyond anything human endurance was meant to handle. Barry was wedged against the narrowest part of the passage, his chest compressed so tightly that every breath felt like dragging air through a straw. Each inhale burned, each exhale was a fight. Behind him, Dana was crammed between his feet and the massive boulder that had become their prison wall. Her breaths came in rapid, shallow gasps as panic clawed its way through her composure. To conserve battery, they eventually switched off their flashlights, and the darkness that swallowed them was absolute. It was the kind of darkness that felt alive, pressing against their skin and suffocating their senses. The silence was shattered only by their ragged breathing and the faint, muffled shouts of their friends somewhere beyond the boulder. But those voices felt miles away. They were buried alive, entombed beneath tons of rock that could shift and crush them without warning. Outside, their friends threw themselves at the boulder with frantic determination, but it didn't matter. The rock might as well have been a solid extension of the mountain itself. Their attempts to dick around it were just as futile. Each scrape of metal on stone only served to highlight how utterly impossible the situation had become. Every frustrated grunt, every shouted command, every hollow clang of tools on rock bled into the darkness where Barry and Dana lay trapped, amplifying the psychological torture. They weren't just stuck, they were sealed away from the world. Minutes dragged like hours, solid stone crushed into their bodies, cutting circulation and causing unbearable pain. The air in their cramped prison grew hot and stale with every breath, yet each inhale felt lacking. Muscle cramps from forced stillness made it worse, but the mental toll outweighed the pain. Thousands of tons of rock loomed above. Every faint sound became a threat. The shifting stones, dripping water, unseen creatures moving in the dark. Time dissolved into nothingness. A chilling thought crept in. They might die here, their bodies lost forever. Their friends made a desperate choice, to race back through the cave for help. Several reached the surface and called emergency services. The alert went out to Sheridan County rescue teams who began preparing specialized gear for an operation they knew would test every limit. The rescue was a fight against time and physics. Rescuers arrived with winches, hydraulic jacks, and specialized cave tools, but moving a 300-pound boulder in a cramped passage was nearly impossible.
Only 1 or 2 people could reach the work area at a time, forcing rescuers to work in shifts. Every tool had to be carried deep into the cave by hand. Each move came with the fear of triggering another rockfall that could make things worse. The unstable rock demanded extreme caution. Hours slipped by as the operation turned into a race against death. The longer Barry and Dana stayed trapped, the higher the risk of severe complications from compression and restricted breathing. Hypothermia added to the danger, as the cave's constant chill could quickly drop their body temperatures to lethal levels. At last, after what felt like endless hours, rescuers managed to position the winch system. Every movement had to be flawlessly synchronized, as even the slightest mistake could destabilize the fragile rocks around them. Inch by inch, with painstaking precision, the 300-pound boulder was dragged away from the passage. When Barry and Dana were finally free, the moment was overwhelming, a mix of pure relief and excruciating pain. After being trapped for so long, their muscles had locked up, refusing to cooperate. Rescuers carefully guided them out, each motion deliberate as if pulling them back to life itself. The trek back through the winding cave passages felt surreal, every step carrying them further from the nightmare that had nearly claimed their lives. At around 10:30 p.m., almost 8 hours after their simple afternoon adventure began, Barry and Dana emerged from Tongue River Cave, exhausted, shaken, but alive.
In this next story, when a cave owner tries to mess with nature, everyone else inside are forced to pay the price.
May 5th, 1997. The morning sun barely touched the rocky mouth of Arnold Hollow Cave as 4 explorers prepared for what seemed like just another adventure. At exactly 9 a.m., Dell Lancaster, her sister Diane, family friend Phyllis Nelson, and cave owner John Nelson stepped into the cool darkness, their headlamps slicing through the shadows. For John, this was no ordinary trip. For weeks, he had been planning this day. Deep inside his cave, about 400 yards from the entrance, lay a stubborn crawlway, a tight squeeze that had always blocked his progress. He was convinced that beyond that narrow slot waited a stunning formation room, untouched by human eyes. Today, he believed, was the day they would finally break through and claim the discovery. The group moved with confidence through the familiar passages. Dell, just 36, was an experienced caver who had spent years underground. Her older sister Diane, 40, shared the same passion for exploration. Phyllis, though 64, carried herself with the steady assurance of someone who had decades of experience beneath the earth. John Nelson, both their guide and the cave's owner, led them onward with excitement. Eventually, they reached the stubborn passage. The tunnel narrowed until it was little more than a crawl space, just enough for a single body to squeeze through. Dell went first, inching her way into the rock throat. Diane followed, then Phyllis. Each woman pressed and twisted, forcing themselves past the constriction. John stood at the entrance, studying the opening. He had pushed through this crawl before, but it was always a struggle. Broad-shouldered and described by friends as a robust fellow, the space had never been forgiving. But today, he had a different plan. Instead of forcing his way through again, he decided to make the passage larger. Not just for himself, but for everyone. At least, that was the logic at the time. He pulled out his tools and began chipping at the rock, striking at loose slabs of breakdown. Piece by piece, stone fell away, and with each strike, the passage seemed to inch closer to opening. But the cave was fragile, balanced for thousands of years. His hammering rattled more than he realized. Then, disaster struck.
A deep rumble rolled through the passage, followed by a thunderous crash of stone. In an instant, the crawl collapsed, boulders and debris slamming down until the opening was completely sealed. On the other side, Dell, Diane, and Phyllis were stunned. One moment, they were waiting in a larger room. The next, they were trapped in darkness with no way back. Their only path to freedom had just been buried under tons of unforgiving rock. John froze in horror. The reality hit him like a blow. His decision had trapped 3 people underground. The weight of responsibility pressed on him harder than the rockfall itself. Panicked, he clawed at the collapse, dragging away smaller stones with his bare hands. Sweat poured down his face as he strained against rocks far too heavy for any man to move alone. For over an hour, he fought desperately, but the wall of debris did not budge. Finally, he realized the truth. He couldn't do this by himself. With dread, John turned back. Every step out of the cave felt like abandonment, but he knew it was their only chance. Bursting into the daylight, he called for help. Emergency services were alerted, and soon, cave rescue experts were mobilizing from across the region. By that afternoon, Arnold Hollow Cave was surrounded by rescuers, gear, and worried families waiting for word. The first task was assessment. Experienced explorers studied the collapse. What they found was both promising and terrifying. There was a tiny gap, small enough to allow air and communication with the trapped women, but the rock was unstable. Any careless attempt to dig could trigger another collapse, one that might kill the women instantly or bury them forever. Meanwhile, Dell, Diane, and Phyllis faced their nightmare. The space they were stuck in was barely large enough for 3 adults. They had to remain pressed together, shifting constantly just to keep their legs from going numb. There was no room to lay down, no chance to rest properly. Though they had enough air and no major injuries, the claustrophobia was suffocating. Minutes stretched into hours, each one heavier than the last. Rescuers made a critical decision. The collapse would not be touched until proper support was in place. Shoring timbers would be cut and positioned to stabilize the passage before any rocks were moved. Through the narrow opening, rescuers passed supplies, food, water, warm clothing, and even a small camp stove to fend off the cave's bitter chill. These lifelines kept the women strong and prevented hypothermia as they endured the long wait. As news of the entrapment spread, unexpected help arrived. Workers from a nearby silica mine volunteered their expertise. They knew rock and they knew how to work with heavy tools in dangerous conditions. They joined the rescue effort, helping cut and install timbers that would hold the cave in place during the delicate excavation. Above ground, the scene was tense. Families stood anxiously, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Underground, the rescuers inched forward with painstaking care. Every timber placed, every rock shifted, was a battle against gravity and time.
Inside the collapse chamber, the women tried to stay calm. Outwardly, they spoke in measured tones and encouraged each other. Inwardly, fear never left. Dell silently wondered if she would ever see daylight again. Diane admitted later that she was terrified but kept her fear hidden to avoid panicking the others. Even Phyllis, with all her years of experience, later confessed this was the most frightening ordeal of her life. Finally, as evening fell, the rescue reached its climax. With the passage stabilized, rescuers began carefully removing the blocked rock. Each stone was shifted slowly, with constant checks to ensure nothing shifted dangerously. Hours of tense labor passed. Then, at 8:30 p.m., more than 11 hours after the collapse, light broke through. The passage was open. Cheers erupted from the rescuers, and above ground, families wept with relief. Dell, Diane, and Phyllis were guided back through the crawl, emerging at last into the cool night air. Remarkably, they were in good condition. Though stiff, cramped, and exhausted, they had survived without injury. The supplies, the steady presence of each other, and the tireless work of the rescue team had carried them through. In the aftermath, experts analyzed what had happened. The conclusion was blunt. The collapse had been caused by John's attempt to enlarge the passage. A well-intentioned act had nearly ended in tragedy. The lesson was clear. Never alter a cave's natural formations while others are inside. The risks are simply too great.